Hello and welcome. I'm Chris Braitch, and this is the Seen and Heard podcast, a conversational series. I am an emotional health and leadership coach and co-founder of the not-for-profit Seen and Heard, which supports those seeking healing, connection, and systemic change. My vision is to move myself and the world around me towards connection and compassion. And each week, I will connect with amazing guests who are on their journey to bring about meaningful change in their own lives and the world around them. Thanks for being here. Let's get started. Welcome everybody to the Seen and Heard podcast, a conversational series. I have the great joy today to be joined by Baroness Sal Brinton. Sal is a Liberal Democrat member of the House of Lords who covers victims and vulnerable people, including children. She is a member of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, where she specialises in human rights. Sal is chair of human rights at Liberal International and was a trustee at UNICEF UK. In the 1990s, Sal was co-chair of education and libraries at Cambridgeshire County Council, where she became especially interested in safeguarding and protecting children after a number of scandals. She has continued this interest in her parliamentary work, including work with Mandate Now for the last 15 years, to ensure we have a strong mandatory reporting system. Sal is a wheelchair user and works closely with the Disabled Children's Partnership. Welcome, Sal.
Hello.
It's lovely to have you on the show today. Really appreciate you taking the time.
That's good.
We've sort of been connected in messaging for a while. I believe since one of my colleagues was at a parliamentary event, I think for Survivors Trust, something like that, and you got talking, and we've been in touch ever since. So thank you.
No, it's an absolute pleasure and a passion of mine, safeguarding children in particular. As we talk, you'll see how that's absolutely been embedded through my working life and indeed my family life before.
Yeah, I really look forward to getting into it. And your passion for this is really clear. We meet on that. It's a big thing in my life as well. So, but let's get into it. And where I always like to begin the podcast is to sort of begin at the beginning. So to learn a little bit about how life was for you, your formative experiences growing up, and perhaps the things that really you think shaped the work that you now do, this passion for safeguarding children.
Indeed. Well, I'm the eldest of 6 children. I'm a child definitely of the 50s and 60s, and life was very different then. It was completely different. I was born in the UK, but when I was a toddler, my parents moved to Hong Kong because my dad, who was a broadcast announcer and producer, went to help run Radio Hong Kong. And that cultural experience as a very small child of a completely different environment stayed with me. And my mother used to tell me that I learned how to use chopsticks properly before I learned how to use a knife and a fork. And I loved it there. 2 of my siblings were born in Hong Kong, and we then came back to the UK, where my dad became one of the first ITN newscasters. So he was called Tim Brinton. Nobody under 70 will remember him. And actually the reason for that is he had to give up the job when my parents split up in a very messy divorce by the standards of those days. And I can remember having to climb over a neighbour's fence and go through their garden to escape the press on the front door when I was 9. That was pretty miserable. And the relationship that I had with my parents was affected by that, particularly with my mother, who had felt very let down. But the other thing was I was sent off to boarding school within 2 weeks of them splitting up. No idea it was coming at all. And then each of my siblings was sent to boarding school at the age of 7. And I think that did impact all of us in different ways. Which is not to say, I loved both my prep school and my public school. They took great care. My public school in particular, when we talk about safeguarding children, I had a house mistress who actually really protected me, supported me, and gave me the environment I need. But she couldn't look after the damage that was being done by not being in a family supportive environment, and in particular with a mother who was distraught, and that affected all of us. After I left school, I knew I loved theatre. All my activity was about theatre work in school. I got into trouble for not being academic enough, and I went to train as a stage manager. My first job was Drury Lane Theatre as a dresser on Gone with the Wind. That's going back over 50 years. And then I went to the BBC, where I trained first in radio and then in television. And I became a floor manager latterly in the late 70s, early 80s, working for Jonathan Miller on the BBC Shakespeare's. And at that point, I decided to go and get an education. So I went to university, and I had joined the Liberal Party when I was a teenager because of Peter Hain and the marches, anti-apartheid marches. And there was a very strong Liberal group in Cambridge, and I got heavily involved there. And in the 1990s, by this time I was working as well, I was elected as a county councillor, and I the next day became co-chair of Education and Libraries, which was a big shock. And I had to learn a lot. Luckily, it was a Labour Lib Dem coalition. My Labour counterpart had been a councillor for some time. And almost as soon as I arrived, we had the first scandal, which was the murder of Ricky Neve, which people know the name, who was at a primary school in Peterborough, which was then in Cambridgeshire. And he hadn't turned up for school, and the school hadn't spotted this for a day and a half. And social services were very concerned about the mother, because she had been involved so she'd been in care herself. And one of the first big real tests of my time was having to go and respond to reporters about what the local authority was doing to make sure that schools moderated their systems and checked that every child was actually there. And it really felt frontline and difficult because everybody knew it had failed. But I think the real shock was when we discovered that actually social services were looking after the mother more than they were Ricky. And as a result of that, the whole scandal that ensued. But the big thing was we, the spokespeople, the chairs of committees, discovered we were not being told the truth. There was no duty of candour. And only when things started to come out from outsiders did we really understand what was going on. And here we are, 30 plus years later, and I'm afraid scandals absolutely unfold in the same way. And I cannot understand why people haven't learned. I learned because, in a way, I felt partly responsible for that little boy. I was the chair of education, and we did not protect him either in education or social services. And it changed myself and my colleagues. It changed the way Cambridgeshire worked. It changed the way officers worked. And I said at the time, I do hope no other authority has to go through this, but it does seem to me that too often any organisation that's involved in the safeguarding of children, if people don't understand the consequences, there will be a disaster at some point. And at that point, everybody has to come together to understand what went wrong and to change it. And that's really when my political ambition on this sort of issue started. And I've sort of been doing it ever since in one way or another.
Thank you for that. It's heartbreaking, to hear what happened to the little boy and the family, and the cost to the family, the cost of you losing that young life, but the cost to
it was worse than that. The mother was imprisoned for his murder, but she didn't do it, and she was only freed 10 years ago. I mean, the whole story, it just continues to rebound because everything that could go wrong went wrong, and nobody thought they were owning Ricky or indeed his mother's safety and safeguarding. Awful.
Thank you. And in your view, 30 years on, not much has changed. I mean, there's probably been more scandals in the last 5 years almost, that they just seem to break every other day, whether it's post office or blood or Harrods or Epstein, they're just the list is on and on and on, isn't it?
Well, the scandal about children, I think we're seeing many more being reported, because the one good thing that has happened is that there are whistleblowers who are prepared to stand up. And I mean, there are some appalling ones. The grooming gangs is actually a parallel with the private boarding school scandals of 50 years ago. And yet it was missed, not just by one agency, but by lots. And I think we have to have protection for whistleblowers. We really must. I know from the work I have done when I was spokesperson for my party for the NHS, Too often whistleblowers are managed out of their jobs, including doctors, which is just outrageous. We're so short of doctors. But it's all about that cultural approach to problems. Do we just try to move through it quickly as possible and not really change things? If we don't change the way every single person in the organisation thinks about safeguarding, we are not going to stop these scandals.
No, it's a cultural shift, isn't it?
It really is a cultural shift.
Accountability and putting the most vulnerable first, as opposed
Yes,
to the institution first.
absolutely.
Thank you,
Yeah.
and for sharing as well about your personal journey. And it's the divorce must be so difficult. You said that memory of having to climb garden fences, and really powerful image. But boarding school for you was a good experience. And given what I do for work, I don't always hear about the good experiences. So,
But I wonder if that's because I'm a girl. I am pretty confident in saying that the level of abuse at girls' boarding schools, of sexual abuse at girls' boarding schools, was significantly lower. I mean, I did see some bullying going on, even by teachers, but I never saw what happened to another family member who was at Cot Hill, and very sadly one of the boys who was abused. And I know when he first told his family exactly what had happened, he wasn't believed. Because the school just said, no, the boys are making this up. He wasn't even believed in one of the court cases later on relating to the teacher who had abused him and other children there for 20 plus years. And I think that's the problem. And one of the things I want to do is to be able to give children the voice and the confidence to be able to articulate when they feel things aren't right. And so just to jump back a bit, I was really proud that when I was chair of education with Ian Kidman, got to give credit to Ian, who was my Labour counterpart, we created the first anti-bullying policy of any local authority in the country. We had one of the strongest sex and relationship education policies in the country. And I can remember back in the mid-90s, people saying, but you can't teach 5-year-olds about sex. You don't teach 5-year-olds about sex. You teach 5-year-olds about safe relationships and them feeling comfortable. And yet I still hear on the media people objecting to sex and relationship education, PHSE, whatever it's called this month. But it's so vital to just give even small children the chance of understanding why, if they don't feel safe, they need to be able to know in an environment who to turn to.
Thank you. Yeah, so powerful. And I think part of the work we do is around bringing kind of sex education 2.0 out there, which is the relational side of
it,
which is the energetic side of human beings connecting, and what is appropriate, what is not, boundaries, etc. And knows a full sentence, as they say. But thank you. Yeah, and when you mention that about boarding schools, I think absolutely the sort of sexual abuse side of things for boys in the 60s, 70s, 80s was particularly awful.
Yes.
What we hear from many women who come forward now about their boarding experiences, it was the bullying, it was often physical abuse, bullying, but neglect, just not having their needs met, and a culture of being pitted against each other, overly competitive, and a lot of shame around bodies, shame around, particularly in boarding schools throughout puberty, etc. So, I think it's very important we recognise their experiences as equally challenging, but the headlines do tend to be around the sort of male sexual abuse. Yeah. Thank you. And my heart is with the family member you mentioned. It's just awful, and we're working at the moment with Alex Renton, the journalist, looking at a redacted form of his list that he's been keeping. So no names on there, but when you look at the scale of 50 years worth of complaints on there, it was so widespread that there's over 600 schools on that list.
Yes, I'm not surprised.
That just puts it into perspective. So
yeah, indeed.
Thank you. So as you kind of came out, Cambridge sort of set you up for this approach and bringing anti-bullying in, and really starting to understand, safeguarding the most vulnerable. We talked about mandatory reporting, and we talked about
Yes.
the fact it's not. How have we not learnt by now? So
Yeah.
as we sit in, so we're May 2026. There is some mandatory reporting in the crime and policing bill.
Yes, which I fought for, but not
I'd
that.
love, I'd love to hear your view on what that looks like and what work we've still got
Oh,
left to do. Yeah.
when you have a portfolio that you're passionate about, I've been in the Lords now for 15 years, and mandatory reporting was one of the very early things I started working on for obvious reasons. It feels like Groundhog Day. So Wednesday is a Groundhog Day, when there will be, I am sure, somebody will have a private member bill submission for the next Parliament over the next probably couple of years, to say that mandatory reporting needs to be strengthened. I mean, it might not happen this time simply because the Labour government have done something towards it. But mandate now, and certainly myself, I don't believe that they've gone far enough, because unless you, again, have a whole organisation system and a cultural shift, it will not work. And the system they've got in place doesn't have that. It's not the system that they've got in Australia, in a number of states in Australia. It's not the system in it's like 180 other countries now, where everyone in the organisation, even the dinner supervisor, the even the cleaner, would know in the school that they need to go and find the person to talk to and just say, look, I'm worried about this particular child because things just don't seem right. And they would know that if they saw something really bad, they would get into trouble. Not necessarily criminal trouble, but they would get into trouble. But the trouble is when the system isn't working. What we know is when you have an organisation that takes that approach, it really, really works. And we need to say we've got to strengthen it. So I'll be watching the new system going into place. But the next time we have another bill like crime and policing, myself and Tanny Gray-Thompson and Baroness Joan Walmsley, who pioneered this long before I got into the House of Lords, will all be there to try and make sure that we catch any holes that there are in the system.
Thank you. So yeah, I really appreciate that. I mean, we've worked for the last couple of years with mandate, with Tom and Jonathan, with Richard Scorer, a number of other lawyers who've been big in this, David Greenwood and Malcolm Johnson and others who really care about. You can feel there's a lot of passion around this. Alex Renton, of course, being another one, and Dino Nocciavelli. But there was a real sort of groundswell that it was sort of an Elon Musk thing that happened around Christmas. The press there was grooming gangs. The press fired up. Suddenly, we had 20 IICSA recommendations on the table for discussion. And we all got very excited. And now, probably 15 months on from that, there's a couple sort of semi-in train. But as you say, the mandatory reporting, no criminal sanctions, not as much protection for whistleblowers, and doesn't cover both known and suspected abuse. So anything to add to those three that really need to be present?
No, those are the key three. And I just want to go back to something else from my time as Chair of Education and Libraries in Cambridgeshire. We had, I think this was probably about 2 years into my term, called in by the Director of Education to say that a school caretaker had been found to be sexually abusing children at one of our primaries. And the head had concealed it, partly because he didn't believe it. And he was a brilliant head teacher, but he just wanted the problem to go away. And it was incredibly difficult. And I can remember working through that. And that was when I realised that you have to have a system that makes the most senior people accountable. You've absolutely got to do that, because without it, sometimes it's easier just to push it away and just say, we'll ignore it. But I learned then that with something like this, which affects children across the board, and by the way, this was mainly little girls who had repeatedly over the years told their parents that they didn't like him, especially when he took them off behind wherever it was and did things to them. And yet the head just said, no, well, I'll talk to him. I'm sure they've misunderstood, and it's awful. And it's still happening. It is still happening.
Thank you.
Awful.
Yeah, it's so tragic. I mean, there's two bits
And by the
here.
way, the head was sacked. The head had to go.
Yeah.
It wasn't just the caretaker convicted. We had to take action.
Thank you. I mean, there's two things here I really want to have a look at. I want to talk about institutions and whether they can ever truly sort of police themselves, this cultural side of things. And I would like to talk about, what blew me away coming in. I've got a business background before I had a breakdown and, a healing journey and sort of seen and heard and all the other stuff that's happened. When I came into this and I had mandatory reporting explained to me by Tom at Mandate Now, took the time to let me know what had happened and fill me in. I was completely dumbstruck. This wasn't already a thing, that we didn't already have this. And I've come to awareness as to why, that might be, but it is quite remarkable. The fact that it's still being opposed by many of the people who work in contact with vulnerable people and children. What's your take, appreciating your role, but what's your take on why there is a fear of effective mandatory reporting?
I think the organisations that are involved with children who've opposed it have been very concerned about junior staff being made responsible, the only person responsible for the information. So if let's go back to the dinner supervisor seeing something at playtime or overhearing something, that the argument goes, these people should not need to be responsible. Yes, it would be good if they reported it to the responsible person in the school, but the issue is they may become frightened for themselves about what will happen if they do report it. And that's why the cultural side of mandatory reporting is so vital, and indeed why it works in Australia, because every single bit of training in that school always covers the safeguarding angles for every level of member of staff. And so you get an organisation that it becomes a water cooler moment when one teacher might say to another, I'm a little worried about somebody in your class. I'm sort of picking up vibes that there might be something going, and then they can talk. They can then go to the person who has the legal responsibility to start to look at it. This divide is really, really unhelpful because, I know from my own behaviour, children learn to cover up anything that's going to get them called out for doing things. I knew how to hide in a full classroom if I was having a rubbish day. I'd nod my head and appear to write things up, but in my head I was screaming. But you've got to have a system that is a whole organisation one. And I'm going to jump ahead in time. We'll perhaps come back to IICSA. But when I was president of the party, we changed our rules. And one of the things we tried to do was to change our culture. So if you want to talk about Cyril Smith later on and what I did with IICSA, that's absolutely fine. But the practical thing that I did there in about 2017, 2018, was to go and talk to our youth organisation and say, what is it that you need from us to be able to articulate what's going on? We had all political parties have stories of their young people being groomed, seduced by influential politicians, or not even politicians, influential people behind the scenes. And the simple answer was, we need to be able to report things up, even if you look at it, because we need to know that somebody will listen to us and believe that we have concerns. It's not the same as believing, there's this great argument about you shouldn't say when you first interview a possible victim of rape or abuse, I believe you. The police have a very particular language, and they enable conversations that are extremely difficult, that are supportive and saying, you have a right to be heard. I believe you need to tell me what's going on. And I watched in our party at that time things transform. I had senior counsellors ringing me to say that the 2 or 3 in particular who at conference would spot things and they'd just say, a bit worried about so and so, what do you think we should do? And young liberals would start to come and talk to us as well if they thought that somebody was perhaps in being a bit too friendly. They didn't know how far it was going to go, but all of those things. The culture changed and it became much easier for people to have those brief conversations to say, is what's going on there okay? Let's be careful about this. And obviously complaints across political parties have rocketed. There's other reasons for that. It's happening everywhere. But I do think we did start to change the culture, really change the culture, and that young people, because I don't think this is just about under 18s. This is about young adults who are away from home the first time, going into a very adult environment, and it's about power play and how people can abuse that power, whether knowledgeably or just not even thinking about what they're doing. But we as an organisation actually say, no, that's not on, and we need people to be able to articulate when they're worried.
Yeah, thank you. So, coming from a business background, when we did culture change in big organisations, global companies, it had to start at the top, and it had to be bred into every single level. Every one-to-one catch-up you have with your line manager, there'd be a question: how are the people in your team? How are they feeling? And it's this. What came to me as you were speaking is, let's say you feel when something is wrong. You don't think something is wrong. You often don't see it because it's behind closed doors. And we know that young people, because of all those things you've described, they don't come forward. Usually, it takes 25 years on average.
Yes.
And only 1 in 9 ever say anything in their lifetime.
Yes.
So those stats are frightening. But it comes to me that when people in roles, in regulated professions, in roles where they're working with young people, vulnerable people, as soon as you think, you're then into jobs being wrong, what will happen, But if you feel, I feel something's wrong, being able to go straight out to the local authority designated officer, to the ladder, or not having to report inwards and upwards to a group that you may know will protect themselves and the institution. So just feeling something is off and being able to say, as you say, it's cultural to then go, I feel something's off, I'm going to share it. I'd rather be wrong and say something than possibly.
Absolutely.
We have one, we do surveys at Seniorhurst schools. We do big wellbeing and welfare surveys for schools, and through those we often pick up safeguarding challenges in there from young people. And I had one on Friday night. It was late Friday night. The whole school team's gone home. I read something that didn't feel right, and there was a part of me, an institutionalized part, a thought that said, it's a bit late, it's Friday night, who's going to be around? I almost tried to talk myself out of something, and then the feeling heart came through and went, doesn't matter, it's a child. So that's why there were processes. I got hold of the right people. It all was okay, but there was still a little institutionalized boarding school boy part that went,
absolutely, yes.
Don't rock the boat on a Friday night. I'll own that. It wasn't right, but it was a thought.
But we have to be self-aware about that in whatever role we have. I mean, we've seen this in Parliament too as well, haven't we, with abuse of young staff and things like that. And I think Parliament, both ends, we have different systems, but both ends have really understood that, and the systems are in place to try and protect particularly young parliamentary staff.
That's brilliant. I'm really pleased to see.
Let's hope it's working. But the point is,
I feel though, from what you're saying, there is a groundswell, there is a momentum in the right direction with this.
Yeah.
Where are we at now then? So we know what we've got. Kind of, you said there's a version of mandatory reporting going in. So if we could perhaps segue to IICSA recommendations and then your experience with IICSA and Cyril Smith, that would be great. What's your take on? I mean, given there's a lot in the news at the moment around reform. Have just had a very strong showing at local elections. There was a commitment to put IICSA recommendations, or 20 of them, into process. What's your take on where we're at?
Well, I think the big issue about mandatory reporting is that mandate now, and I agree with them. And by the way, can I just say how wonderful both Tom and Jonathan are? They've been doing this for years and years and years. They've been bugging politicians. They don't bug me. I enjoy hearing from them. But they really have kept to this. And if they really deserve the gratitude of us politicians, because they've got the data that we need to show what doesn't work. So I've explained earlier on why I don't believe that what is now the law, because the Crime and Policing Act has come into being, is enough. I was worried that the IICSA recommendations weren't strong enough either. They were better than we've got under the Crime and Policing Act, but the gaps there are all about whole institution ownership, which enables that cultural change. Because if it only affects a few people in the organisation, then the organisation can say, well, actually, we'll focus on training for them. And then you've got the wider group of people who just aren't aware, can't pick up when something is going on, or what's leaving them to feel disconcerted. Is it something I need to report? All the reasons that you talked about, the survey response that you were looking at recently. Actually, it's those bells going off and you're just saying, well, I'm not sure, but it doesn't matter if I'm not sure. I actually just need to tell somebody who will know how to look at this. And that is my great fear, that is what is going to be missing. So we will be watching closely.
Yeah, absolutely. I think once it's in, I'm not, an expert on the process, but is it that once something's on the legislature, if something's, an act has come into being, then straight away you can start to campaign for amendments, or how does it work?
So the first thing is, and I'm sorry, this is going to get very briefly technical.
Sorry.
When a bill is passed into law, once the king has signed it off, and the very end of Parliament, the clerk has to stand up and announce in medieval French that the king has approved the bill. Don't go there. It doesn't start automatically. It is possible for a government to say, I want every single section of this bill to be enacted straight away, and then bang, it goes straight in. But quite a lot of it, they will want to prepare the ground for, particularly in something like the Crime and Policing Bill, where it affects the way the police process cases, where the rights of victims have to be through a new victims code that they've only just done the consultation on, all of those things. So they say, well, we'll delay that. We then talk about when they say, no, we're going to do that. And we talk about that bit of the bill being commenced. Now, I haven't looked to see whether this has been commenced. I suspect it won't have been, but I believe the government when they say they want this urgently. But there's usually a bit of a time lag. And once it's commenced, in theory, it should be straight into practice. But again, some of these things, they're going to have training for every organisation that is involved in mandatory reporting. You're talking about the regulated professions. That's an enormous number of organisations. So I can understand why sometimes things get delayed. My frustration is that I worked on the Victims and Prisoners Bill started just over 2 years ago, finished exactly 2 years ago. And all the victim stuff, bar one tiny bit, was not commenced before this time last year. And this government has only commenced parts of it now. There's large bits of it which were passed through Parliament, approved by the King, everything else, nothing happened. So one of our very tedious roles is watching bills and then going back with questions about why something hasn't actually been commenced. Sorry about the technical jargon, but we're on it. We're going to be watching, because we're not going to, the people cross-party, across the House of Lords, there is a fairly large group of us who are watching this, and we will be asking questions of ministers in the chamber if things don't start moving soon.
Okay. Thank you. It's great to know you're watching, and it's great to know you've got support as well. You mentioned, some colleagues. I remember reading the Tanya Gray Thompson Private Members Bill around mandatory reporting, and thinking, that's the one. And then when I saw what was going in, I was like, oh no, we had it right there, and then it's been walked down.
Hers is the most recent. I had the one before that, and Joan Walmsley had the one before that.
Keep going in a cycle.
We don't go away. We're like that bad penny. We just keep turning up.
Yeah. And thank you for acknowledging Tom and Jonathan as well. They couldn't do enough to help us to understand this and work with us at the start. And they've ruffled lots of feathers over the years in the right ways, to be honest.
Yeah.
I know sometimes Tom can be very direct, and that doesn't work for everyone. But I know his heart is really good.
It is because his heart is in the right place that he is direct, and sometimes we need to hear that.
Yeah, it's uncomfortable truth sometimes.
Yeah.
Thank you. So looking at IICSA then, you were really involved in it.
Briefly.
Yeah.
Briefly.
So
but
can you tell us about that?
Okay. So in the report on Westminster, the Westminster scandals, there was a whole little section on Cyril Smith. Most of the rest was around Westminster. But the Cyril Smith story, which started, I think, before I was born, was a very, very long time ago. And that report was extremely powerful because it wasn't just the usual organisations. It included the police, and it also included children's homes. And it was dreadful, absolutely dreadful. And every political party that had a politician that was involved was asked to contribute to IICSA. And as the president of the Liberal Democrats, other parties call them chairs, but our president is elected by its members, was asked to give evidence, first of all, on responding to questions about Cyril Smith, which I obviously couldn't do because I wasn't around at the time, so somebody else covered that. But then, very importantly, a witness session about how we were going to change things so that that never happened again inside our party. And I did an enormous amount of research. By that stage, it was a lot public. And I had obviously, as a junior party member, long before I was even became a councillor, aware of things beginning to come out about Cyril Smith. But when I started to read what he did, it was absolutely appalling behaviour. And he should have been stopped. But the people who were permitting it were some very senior policemen in Yorkshire, and that was the problem. Did people in the local party know? I mean, this is because my perspective was, how does the party respond to this? Don't think so. I am pretty confident that some senior people inside Parliament knew, because there was stuff coming out. But I don't think it was taken seriously, because at that time, 60s, 70s, even into the late 70s, it just wasn't a thing. There was no public system of whistleblowing to say you really need to take this seriously. So very sadly, my party completely failed on it, and I said as much. We said as much. We recognised that was not good. So that's why when I gave my evidence about what we'd changed, I mean, we had long changed the basics, but we went back to review. And that was when we started the work with the various constituent parts of the party, including our youth movement, because it's really, really important to be able to hear directly about the experience of particularly in this instance, young people. Cyril Smith was abused children, but children's homes, schools, wherever he could get them. But actually, our responsibility is for those who come into contact with us, whether they're members or whether they are visitors, and that abuse, which is why we had a public consultation. We then changed our rules again, and we set up various support mechanisms. So that was what we're doing. Did I enjoy being interviewed by IICSA and Richard Scorer and others? No, rightly so. I was there to answer for a body that had completely failed. It didn't matter that it was before my time. It was my organisation, and it should not have done so. Did I learn from it? Yes. Which is why I went on after IICSA. The Commission for the Standards in Public Life were very concerned by IICSA's very early reports, and they got together the chairs and the presidents of all the political parties in Westminster, and we worked together for about 18 months, 2 years. I think the Lib Dems were ahead of the others simply because of Cyril Smith. and we'd had to do some stuff. It was very, very public. And I then worked with people from 2 other parties who had virtually no systems at all, which they had been frank about in the report that came out from the Commission. But that has been the beginning of change, and I was pleased to play a part. And by the way, I don't think it's sorted, because as each new generation arrives, as new people become senior, they also need to understand their responsibilities, and things do go wrong. But if the institution, organisation is aware enough, the protections will be there because people will speak out.
Yeah.
That's the point.
Thank you. Really, thank you for sharing that and for your work within that, within that part of things. What I heard really strongly was that you couldn't defend the indefensible, so you just came out and said, we got it horribly wrong here, we need to learn from it. That's Absolutely. Something I don't hear very often. I mean, in our work, there are still, anywhere between 10, 15 schools a month at the moment we're going through civil or criminal process in boarding and independent schools around non-recent abuse. The vast majority are still following a policy of not, issuing an unequivocal apology, not providing emotional health support for the person who's come forward, not having good processes. So we're trying to bang the drum, Boarding School Association and others, to improve this. But time and time again, we see lawyering up, gaslighting, or that was the old lot. The school's changed hands twice since then. That sort of is all better now. That was before, a long time ago now. But from what you said, is you own something that was 50 years previous, and so we got it wrong. We've got to make some changes, and I just want to see that in the world. But I'm not seeing it right now all the time. So
one of the things that my dad did after he ceased to be a very public face was he set up a small business, almost the first of its kind, with some colleagues in helping large companies during their worst moments, when they crisis management, we'd call it these days. And one of the things that they worked really hard on was, if something has gone badly wrong, you have to own it at the start. Otherwise, the problems absolutely magnify and magnify and magnify. The difficulty is that the first response often of the solicitors that the schools will be talking to is, protect yourselves, just don't say anything at all. And it just does not work. Even if you can't say what the detail is, you can always say something has gone badly wrong here. We're owning it. We're going to look at it, because the reputation to the organisation, even if it was 50 years ago, is enormous, and particularly for boarding schools in the current climate. They don't need to do that.
No, I mean, looking at the Alex Renton stuff, a third of the schools on that list have either closed or merged. A third. And it's an enormous list. There's over 600 schools. It's remarkable. But, might say business background, we were always taught PR-wise, when you had a product recall, when you had a failure of service, is you come straight out, unequivocal apology, you provide support for the person, but only if they're choosing. You don't force it down their throat. What would you like? Here's an array of things. You're in charge.
Yeah.
But we don't do this with the most important things that might have happened, where children may have been harmed. I think, I'm hearing good things from the governing bodies getting keener. So Boarding School Association, Independent Schools Inspectorate and others, but they can only advise, and the schools can still be a law unto themselves. So I personally would like to see something tougher out there, and that is effective with mandatory reporting and others. But
absolutely. And there almost needs to be, for the schools, and perhaps it's the boarding school organisation that owns this, of just saying, here are some stories about schools that did decide to say something's gone badly wrong, and how they felt and what it changed compared to some of the other stories. That would be really good. I think from your perspective, from the victim's perspective, the survivor's experience, the schools don't want to hear that at that moment. But if they hear it from other schools that have found, painful though it is, it has worked for them, that's probably quite a strong lesson.
I agree. Yeah. My last presentation focused on 3 or 4 that got it really right, not the 50 that had got it wrong, because actually I'm not about naming and shaming. This is about modelling, and it's about good best practice, isn't it? It's so important. Thank you. And so, when we did the intro, you're passionate about safeguarding children's rights. I mean, just to ask a really direct question about the UK, I would say that we undervalue young people in this country, and yeah, I sort of know why. I have some suspicions around stiff upper lip and the use of sort of the Victorian era of using children as workers and not protect them. There's a load of stuff. But do you feel as a country that we do enough to protect children, or just not just protect them, but value them as our greatest resource?
No. And politicians have a lot to answer for. I'm going to broaden it very slightly. Children and young people don't vote. I mean, some young people vote. I mean, I'm going up to about sort of 25s, but the percentage vote for the under 25s is still quite low. And politicians always talk about key things that affect working people and older people, because the older you get, the more likely you are to vote. And that then sets the trend for how you tackle problems. The invisible problems, like abuse of children, like seriously disabled children and the support they and their families get, are not of interest because they don't buy votes. You cannot persuade the public to vote for someone on those grounds. And yet, the point about our democracy is that we should be protecting the most vulnerable. And I had an argument with Toby Young of the Free Speech Union in the Lords during the Crime and Policing Bill about free speech is everything. And we ended up arguing about John Stuart Mill. So he quoted the bit about John Stuart Mill where he said, you have the right to speak and act as you want in your community, your society, we would say in the 21st century. But he stopped at that. And I just said to him, but you didn't read the second sentence in that paragraph, because that says, providing it does no harm to anybody else who cannot remedy it themselves. So the harm principle is absolutely key for children, young people, and children who are abused and children who are disabled absolutely need even more support. And there, I'm afraid, we are still failing catastrophically. And it's awful. I am that generation, of the 60s, who said to our grown-ups, you're not listening to us. We went out on the streets. We changed the style of dress. We changed the way you have relationships, all of those things. And we can't see it now. We just cannot see it now for our young people. Their problems are different. Completely messed up the university funding system, completely messed up housing and access to housing. Our young people are right to be very, very angry with us. But at the heart of this is how we treat children. And that's why I was so proud to be involved with UNICEF for 6 years as a trustee. The rights of the child and the rights of the disabled person, absolutely core human rights, and we forget them at our peril.
Thank you. Yeah, it really speaks to me. Thank you, Sal. So with that work, with you, so you're a trustee of UNICEF UK in the past, and chair of human rights at Liberal International. Tell us a little bit about your current, so the chair role at the moment. What are you seeking to do there, and what are you sort of driving forward?
We're a very practical organisation. We have member parties across the world, and we work in countries where. Let me go back a step. So how if you're interested in human rights, how in your own parliament do you make something happen? So what I do is, I'm a very proud supporter of Jimmy Lai in Hong Kong. I will ask questions regularly in Parliament about Jimmy Lai in public. And I will also have private conversations with ministers of things that I don't particularly want to be discussed, because it might put prisoners at risk. What happens in the UK and in a lot of other countries is that when you ask a question in Parliament, then the Foreign Office gets the ambassador of our country in that country to go and question the equivalent of the Home Office and say, we've had very concerning questions about the conditions for this political prisoner. And we're very, very concerned in Jimmy Lai's case, because he's a British citizen, we're really concerned about that. And if people from 70 countries are all asking questions at around the same time, the country who's receiving visits from ambassadors realizes the world is watching them and their behavior. And I call it the pinprick method, but it does work. It really does work. The UN Council of Human Rights, which meets for 3 very long sessions, like parliamentary terms a year, does reports on countries, but it also does reports on individuals as well. And Liberal International is a designated NGO with them. There are very few, but we are one of them, which means we have the right to put forward reports about countries or reports about individuals, which will then be debated. And we're very active in UN Human Rights Watch as well. And I've been to that. They have a big summit once a year where we talk to political prisoners who've escaped. We have empty chair sessions where literally there is a big empty chair and someone else will speak to a prisoner in another country. So about another country who cannot get out of that country. And oh my goodness, it's heavy duty work. And my committee is amazing. We're all volunteers, but we make things happen. We make countries aware of when they're abusing people. So we are, I think, of the global political party organisations, we are the most active in this area, simply because, as a Liberal, it's something we all feel really strongly about, for the reasons I explained with John Stuart Mill and everything else earlier.
Yeah. Well, bless you for your work in that area. It's so important. What do you get to zoom out much more than most of us. You can see sort of from a high level across the global. I have a strong feeling about the trend of the world. A lot of people say, oh, it's a terrible mess at the moment, this, that, there is a lot of challenges, but I also zoom out and see a lot of progress over the last 50, 60 years in many areas. What do you see on a global level at the moment? Is it getting better? Is it tougher? What's going on?
If you'd asked me this question 5 years ago, I'd have said it was consistently getting better.
Okay.
But that is not the case. One of the complications of the global disorder at the moment, let's not get into political arguments, is there is a real threat to human rights as a matter of principle. And one can argue about whether things need to be changed. But what we're seeing, particularly for children, is that in areas of conflict, their lives are as severely affected as the shock of the Biafra famine, which I remember from when I was a young adult. It is appalling what is going on in many countries. Even in places like Ukraine, children are dying daily. And we know, by the way, what's going on both in Ukraine with what Russia is doing, but also in Sudan, in Darfur. I could go on and on, right around the world, including bits of South America. It's a crime against humanity to kill children, whether it's by starvation or whether it's in warfare. And I am really worried that there is a serious threat to the UN. The UN needs to be reformed. It was built for a time after the Second World War and everything changed. We need to have very senior politicians coming together. And there's a small grouping of former very exceptional prime ministers who are doing that look, but they can't do it, particularly at the moment, whilst America is in the state that it's in, because America has been one of the key movers in the past for making things happen. Mm-hmm. So I'll be honest with you, I am very, very fearful. Okay. Very fearful.
Well, thank you. Thank you for your view on that, Sal. Thank you. So you mentioned something that was very close to my heart, which was disabled young people. My son Ben sadly died when he was 3.5. He had a life-limiting condition when he was born and was disabled throughout his life. We received some great support at times. Mainly we relied on the third sector because the sort of community support was quite difficult. But you've done a lot, within the Disabled Children's Partnership, within your broader work. Can you talk to us, and obviously you mentioned you're a wheelchair user yourself, can you talk to us about your journey with that and how the world is supporting or not disabled people at the moment?
cousin, my cousin, who is my godmother, her eldest daughter was born with cerebral palsy. So from a very early age, I was used to seeing Vicky or pictures of Vicky being looked after. She's living in a wonderful environment at the home farm team. She's been there for many years now. So I was very aware of disability growing up. My own disability has sort of grown gradually, and when I went into the Lords, I was sort of on the cusp of using a walking stick and into a wheelchair, and I've been in a wheelchair for most of the last 15 years. And I live with not a life-limiting illness, but certainly it's a chronic illness. And I know that I spend far too much of my time seeing different doctors and changing medications and goodness knows what. So I understand the complexities of that. I got involved in a campaign about 200 meters from my house where I'm doing this morning. There's a lovely small specialist children's respite care centre called Nascot Lawn. And the children, like my cousin Vicky, would be able to go there for one weekend a month to give their parents a bit of a rest. You will know, even if you have 4 lots of carers coming in during the day to help you, the burden on parents of a child with a life-limiting illness never stops. It never stops. And the health authority decided to close it down. And the parents took them to court and they won. And it was still closed down. There is a different respite care system. They would argue there is care available, but it's not what it was. And Nascot Lawn was one of the first. Most of the very few specialist centres like that are now closed. And the burden on these families is enormous, and that's why I remain involved with the DCP. Mm-hmm. At the same time that this was happening, I became a very proud grandmother of twins. Born at 29 weeks. Mm-hmm. The large one was just over 1 kilo. The small one was 700 grams. And she spent the first year of her life in a hospital, was on a ventilator, fed by tube, and could only have people who had been trained by the hospital to look after her. So based on Nascot Lawn, my husband and I used to do at least a weekend a month. And our son and daughter would swap houses. They'd take Eliana, who was the one at home, and when she was out of hospital, so I'm talking about sort of when Amelia, the smallest one, came home at nearly a year, for the next 2.5 years, we tried to provide that support. I know what the reason I was almost tearing up when I was talking earlier on about Nascot Lawn is I have been there in the night when that damn alarm has gone off, mainly because she's rolled over. And you don't know if it's a problem with the heart, or you don't know if it's just that you need to strap the foot again where the sensor is. These children are invisible to wider society, and we need to support them. Whenever we discuss disability, it seems that governments need to be gung-ho about it. And one of the problems is the easiest budgets to cut is the support for children like this. And the NHS has done it already. We can't do it in social care. But I am hearing horrible stories about help being reduced for families. And the answer is they're told their children can go into an institution. That's not on. So I think that's one of the big next fights we're going to have to start to do.
Thank you. Thank you, Sal, for sharing so much emotion coming. Everything you just talked through was my experience with Ben. Yeah, but
if you know, you know.
If you know, you know. I remember going to one of the respite weekend places with Ben. I just had all these memories coming back. It was a wonderful weekend.
Yes.
And I had twins at that time who were born prematurely. My girls came along when my son was diagnosed. So, we went through a whole testing process.
Gosh.
Genetic.
Oh
my goodness. Yeah. But that weekend at that beautiful place in Basingstoke somewhere, incredible memory. And we needed that help.
Yes.
And, my heart's with you. If you need any support on that, you know where I am, because that's very close to my heart. But you said it best, and which is that, the mark of a society is how it looks after its vulnerable people, its most vulnerable. And for me, it's a disconnection problem. We've just too disconnected from self, from each other, from the world around, and that's the rest of my life's work will be, and moving myself and the world around me towards connection and compassion. That's something I say a lot, but it's something we have to do.
It is. It absolutely is.
Thank you. So as we start to wrap up, Sal, thank you again for your time, for all your energy, campaigning work, holding people to account, the work you've done in your career, and now, in your sort of advisory roles and volunteering roles. Is there anything we haven't said that needs saying, or is there anything you want to leave with?
I just no. I think I've said it. If I tried to summarize it, I'd want to say, on safeguarding and abuse, it's all about culture. We need the laws, but we need the cultural change. On the rights of children, and especially disabled children, we have to raise this up from not just being a story about brave children to making sure the society we're looking after children properly, all children properly.
Sure. That's a perfect summary, and I can't say any more than that. So thank you so much today, Baroness Sal Brinton, for your time and energy. And thank you so much, everyone, for listening or watching. It's been the Seen and Heard podcast conversational series. Please do tune in to the next one, like, share, and send this one around, because what Sal has brought today is very important and powerful. It's about culture, it's about connection, and it's about looking after the most vulnerable in our society. So thank you. Thanks very much, Sal.
Thank you.
And we'll see you on the next one. Bye for now.